I'm Lawrence Francis, host of Interpreting Wine, welcoming you back to the Mosaic of Wine Series 2. We continue the series today in the company of Krister Bengtsson, Star Wine List founder. We hear Krister's origin story, taking us from his journalism foundations through the early days of founding Star Wine List, via the current people he has working around him in the business. In culture, we discuss the Scandinavian influence on Star Wine List. Before exploring the funding model for the company, we talk awards and integrity, attracting younger drinkers, the influence of natural wine, before getting into the long-term picture for Star Wine List. Star Wine List hosted their UK Awards event on Monday the 3rd of March. And at the end of the episode, I'll let you know how to discover all of this year's winners. Enjoy.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. Great to be here and join the podcast. So I'm a journalist originally from Sweden. Started out working in radio news and local newspapers, and then moving into more online media. Way back around the first .com boom, early millennium, and then also on the side started writing about wine, freelancing, because I fell in love with wine. Did that, lived in Bordeaux for a while, and got involved in the wine trade a little bit as well. And those two backgrounds kind of came together when we started Star Wine List now, as you mentioned, 7 years ago. So really a media background in traditional media and more online media over the years has been the start of it all.
Yeah, no, amazing. And I think there were, a few elements from that story that I found interesting in our pre-talk. But one, and this will get very meta, you mentioned something that really stood out to me in terms of your, let's say, affinity for audio, really. And you were, really bringing out for me some interesting elements around creating soundscapes. So I wonder if, you wouldn't mind just focusing in a little bit on that side of the story, just to, bring the listener up to speed.
Absolutely. And of course, it ties into kind of the modern world of podcasts and the popularity of it, and that you can really spend time, whereas a lot of the media nowadays is very short and clips and TikToks and everything. But podcast has become the other end of that spectrum, where you really spend time with people and stories and voices. And I loved working with radio as a medium when I started out, because it can be both very quick. When you work in news, you always have the next newscast within the hour, and you really have to move fast to do that, but still with quality. And the editing, everything goes super fast. But also that you can tell a story with, small means, so to say, bring in sounds and the environment and create a story and plays out in your head when you're listening to it as well. Whereas if you were to do that in video or, TV, that creates, you need a huge production around it. But with the audio, it's an interesting medium for intimacy and stories and environments around it.
Yeah, and again, you've been in the game longer than I have, so I'm sure as we go through, I'll have some interesting questions and some things that I'd love to sort of learn from you. Really, I think it's a great background, great level of experience that you're kind of bringing across. So let's maybe take you back 7 years or so in time, then, Krister, and let's sort of deep dive into what was in your mind. What was sort of the big idea, let's say, when you settled upon, okay, Star Wine List, this is something that I'm gonna really focus on.
Yeah, it was really an idea that I had and talked to with friends about as well, that there are so many restaurant guides in the world, Michelin, Gourmet, and plenty of national ones. And if you're looking for restaurants, you have a multitude of guides and content around it. But when you're a wine lover, either as an amateur or professional, and want to find great places to drink wine, I felt that you're always kind of reaching out to friends or friends in the trade. Hey, I'm going to Berlin. Where should I go and drink wine? And that kind of kept coming back. And then when you talk to friends who may be living in Berlin and working in the trade, they keep getting the questions as well, just like I did for Stockholm. And you kind of had list of 5 places you always give to your friends, or 10. So I felt there was something missing there to create a guide to places to drink wine, stories around it, really focus on wine in restaurants and wine bars, and to build it inclusive all the way from a small natural wine bars to bistro and fine dining, and to have recommendations by professionals. So maybe with my journalist background, I'm a little bit skeptical of, let's call it the TripAdvisor style crowdsourced content that can be, quality can be up and down. So I wanted to build it with recommendations by sommeliers, sometimes writers, really get a curated selection started. So we started in Stockholm 7 years ago and been spreading since then.
Okay, amazing. And as I really always start these conversations is talking about people. And I think actually, to ask you to introduce us to really 2 sides of the business, I guess the people who work within, Star Wine List itself, but then also that wider network of ambassadors and people who, let's say, curate content for those different cities. I think that would give us a real, a meaningful snapshot of how things work, really.
Yeah, I think we got a small, what we call a bit the core team, working with Star Wine List, and it's started remote even before the pandemic, actually, because it was part of the network as well that I found Leora Levi, who's a Norwegian sommelier and a journalist as well, and she's based in Oslo, and I wanted to bring her on board. We have Camilla Lind, who's based in central Sweden as a project manager and admin. Social media is handled by Caroline in Quebec, Canada. Rachel Fellows, now our new editor, is based in England. So we kind of keep it together in the core team, using WhatsApp and Zoom weekly meetings and everything to work on that. And then the recommendations, as I mentioned, we call it ambassadors. So for instance, Pierre Villapaleja is our ambassador in Paris. He's a sommelier, a restaurateur there. So we ask him a couple of times a year for an update. Okay, what's happening in Paris? Which are the places you'd like to recommend, and share that. So the ambassador network has now grown to, I think, almost 100 in about 45 countries around the world, where we have this great network of people, from sommeliers like Reese Choi in Hong Kong, to Ferran Centelles in Barcelona, and around the world, and writers as well. And the second part of the network is also jury members for our Wine List Awards. So we, apart from the guide, we also create a Wine List Awards that also started in the Nordics and now it's been spreading to more and more cities and countries around the world, where we create celebrations around great wine lists and the teams behind them. And then been very fortunate that a lot of great people have wanted to become involved in the judging of this, like Pascal Lepelletier and Raj Parr in the US and others. So I think it's become our great fortune and strength that a lot of great professionals have wanted to become involved in one way or the other and support it and be part of the community and network. Feel very lucky to have them on board.
Yeah, and my mind, it really just goes back to, I think, really just how amazing entrepreneurship is and how amazing it is to be able to build a successful business, from an idea, from a niche. Again, it's like, can we touch Star Wine List? Can we go and, stand inside Star Wine List? It's an idea, isn't it? Really, it's kind of a concept, and really the most real thing, I think, are the people. That's really where I feel as though it's really gets its power and it's kind of its presence from. Let's say that. So I'm curious, the people that you're working with there, within Star Wine List, what would you say might be some of the kind of important qualities really that they kind of bring to the table, or equally the qualities that you look for when you want to bring new people to the table?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it is a diverse group of people, and you live in different countries and cultures, and things are different. But I think you need to be able to work as a team and be a team player and collaborate and get things done that way. Maybe more more we than I, perhaps in a bit of a cliche, but I think that's very real. Collaborative approach, and I think also a lot of top professionals around the world are. I think the best ones are quite humble as well. They can be confident. I'll take Arvid Rosengren as an example. Swedish sommelier used to be in New York, now based in Denmark. Won best sommelier of the world in 2016, and one of the most successful and well-known somms in the world. But you wouldn't know it when you meet him. Like, he wouldn't bring it up. So when we meet people, I'll have to introduce that part, because he would never say that himself. But he's confident, but humble. I think a lot of cases that happens. They don't have to, show off or prove themselves. They know what they know, and I'm happy to share it.
Yeah, and actually, there's another people element that I think would also be very relevant here, and that's the user base. I know I mentioned to you in our pre-call that I am a user. I'm a regular user of Star Wine List, exactly for that scenario that you described at the start there. I don't know why. I'm from London and live in London, but I'll always just go blank when people ask me for recommendations of where they should be drinking or eating, and I find, oh, okay, yeah, I go to Star Wine List, I can look down and okay, yeah, go there. Oh, that's a new one. So who's I guess who, when you were setting up, who did you think you were making it for, and then how, if at all, has that changed over the past 7 years?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the original demand and need for it came from myself and friends, and that's, you solve your own problems, and then the problem, and you want to fix it. I think that's a good starting point, as you mentioned, for an entrepreneur. That's, okay, here's something to solve, and I know the problem. I feel we can take a chance at trying to build something from around that. And when it comes to the audience, there's one part really consumers, wine lovers who like to go to restaurants. That's one big audience group. The second audience for us is like sommeliers and restaurants, who of course are looking for places to go to as well, and find other wine lists and inspiration, but also to promote what they do and show to the world and where they are and what they're doing. And then we have a third audience, which is the wine trade as a whole. It's producers, importers, and I know they are heavy users of Star Wine List as well, of course, because a lot of the wine trade is traveling a lot and looking for places to go to and find their wines, etc. I was talking to one negociant in Bordeaux, and he said, you saved my life in South Korea. Didn't know where to go and find selection in sold from there. So yeah, it's fun to get feedback from all over the world and people that are using it in different ways. Yeah,
and again, it naturally kind of leads into another question. I mean, I think one of the things, and we'll hopefully get into it as well. I think one of the let's say bigger issues, bigger trends, unfortunately, in wine, is a lot of people talk around the reduction of people drinking wine and challenges of attracting new people into wine, younger people into wine, and more diverse audiences into wine. Are you able to track that sort of information? Is that something that you would feel comfortable giving a sort of an overview of the sort of trends, in terms of ages, locations, demographics, that sort of thing?
Well, we see that in our statistics that the biggest age group in our usage is 25 to 35, so it's a fairly young audience, I think, for a wine channel. And I think, we'd like to be useful for all kinds of wine lovers. As I mentioned, from a small natural wine bar to the 3 Michelin stars, right? In Paris, I'd like to take an example. We have Cave Septime on the guide, and we have La Tour d'Argent. And that's kind of the opposites of the spectrum, but it's all made for wine lovers. And I'm probably a bit older than the average, and I've lived in Bordeaux. Of course, I come from a classical background, but I have so many friends into the natural wine movements, and we taste it a lot and drink a lot, and I love the whole range that you can come together and share in a lot of different ways. And I love also when we do the events and the wine list awards. So, for instance, in Copenhagen, that you have some of the best Michelin star restaurants in the world, and you hang out with your friends who come from the small national wine bars in different parts of Copenhagen, and you can be in the room and have a good time and have so much to share. So yeah, it's cool to see.
Yeah, it does take me back actually. I remember a quote from a guest from a few years ago actually, Michael Saracen, and I always remember him saying that he just he works in the movie business, and most of the time then he was just hanging out with other people from the movie business, and you then just talk shop, you just the conversation gets very narrow essentially. But he was said, the thing that he loved most about the wine world was, if you follow the wine almost, he didn't know who was going to show up. He'd be talking to a cop, I think a grave digger, or it's like all sorts of he just illustrated that all different sorts of walks of life and backgrounds can kind of come through, and hopefully a platform like that, I think it's illustrative, or it should be illustrative of that. Just that I think wine is has a potential. So many hooks there, different styles of wine, different regions, different price points. It's such a broad category that I just wonder if maybe sometimes that's maybe what's getting lost in the communication of it, that there's kind of something for everybody there.
Yeah, I think so. I think wine brings people together in many ways. Either over a glass of wine in a bar, in a restaurant, and you share that and experiences. And also as a community around the world, if you're involved in wine in different ways, it is an international community, which is quite incredible. If you travel to Chile, you will probably know someone who knows someone there, and you'll be invited to a tasting or dinner and things like that. So it's very friendly, I think, universe as a whole. And I think, right. I saw recently a campaign from the California Wine Institute, actually, that was focusing on that. Well, wine can make you put away the phones and actually share time with your friends and people, and that human aspect of it. So really sharing, I think, is important and key, and something that's really cool.
Yeah, and again, I think maybe again talking about the platform, but it's always been my experience that if you follow the wine again, then usually the food and the environment and the music, and it seems to, all these other things seem to be like top level. If you follow the wine, it's been my experience that if you follow something, even if you follow the food, it doesn't always follow that the wine will be, on the same level with the food, or it will be as interesting, let's say, as the food. And I don't know if that's as well something that you either found, or that was sort of in your mind when you were really thinking about who would be using this and who would get value from this.
Yeah, that's something. It's interesting, and it's not something I thought about before. I think that I hear like chefs and foodies using Star Wine List as a restaurant guide, even if they're not really wine people, because it becomes a curated selection. And it's true that if a restaurant cares about wine and has great people in the front of house wine service and selection there, then it's very, very likely that it's good for food as well, right? That's a place that takes care of business. So a lot of people I heard use it just as a restaurant guide, because if it's picked by Star Wine, it's going to be good not only for wine but really good for the restaurant, the food and everything, which we didn't expect. But I think it's true the other way around, that sometimes you may go to a restaurant which is amazing in terms of food, kitchen, everything, but obviously maybe the chef owner doesn't really care about the beverages, and then maybe the beverage selection kind of shifts every 18 months, depending on who's running it, and maybe not complementing or not as much care goes into it. I think nowadays there are a lot more chefs that actually care a lot about the whole experience and beverages too. And even in Sweden, we've seen a trend that quite a lot of chefs do the sommelier training as well, which creates more of a whole thing. But yeah, that's one thing I didn't expect, that Star Wars to be used as a kind of regular restaurant guy, but I'm happy for it.
Yeah, yeah, and it sounds as though then that kind of that I think that observation of the kind of wine first, let's say, and I think as well on the people side of things, you also mentioned in our pre-call something around the platform also kind of building community as well, and people kind of connecting with one another, let's say offline as a result of using the platform.
Yeah, I think that's a cool part of it. We'd like to be, a media platform, of course, a guide, resource, but also community. And I think it's been connecting people in sommelier and restaurant circles, both, connecting the local to the international. So we know that people, meeting up. And I had one example, Karin Dejeborn, who runs Territoriet, which is an amazing wine bar in Oslo. And when they won Best by the Glass list in our awards the other year. And she mentioned she'd been to Berlin. So she hooked up with the By the Glass winners there and went to their place, that restaurant, and had a great time. So that's nice to hear.
Yeah. No, exactly. And it's I think it just underscores really the bigger impacts really that can be made again from an idea, from kind of creating a platform. Really, yeah. And again, we've probably already started to bring in elements from here, but I'd really like to talk about culture. And again, I love talking about Scandinavian culture. It's a part of the world that I really love. And very early on, actually, in the life of interpreting wine, I went over to Denmark. I went over to Copenhagen, and interviewed a number of let's say prominent figures in the maybe natural wine movement over there. And again, I do think it's a region that people do look towards, and again, it's somewhere that I've kind of always enjoyed spending time. So that's sort of one element of your story I'd like to explore. But I think also culture-wise, it was really interesting to me. I'd say the word patience, because I believe that when you started out, your vision, let's say, and your intention with Star Wine List was to build something for the long term. It wasn't to kind of dive into building another Spotify, let's say, but you weren't trying to build really go and raise a load of money and build something huge like that. So yeah, that's a obviously big topics, but yeah, maybe let's start with the attitude to Star Wine List, and of course I'm sure bring in other elements of your location there, which I think would be great to explore.
Yeah, there are a couple of threads there, I think. When it comes to patience and long-term views, I think, I was part of kind of the boom and bust culture around the millennium there, and built one company too fast and crashed and burned. And I think in media, a bit like, if you want to produce wine, that's really a long-term business, right? Planting vineyards and starting something, and it's really forces you to think long-term, I think. I think media is a little bit the same, that it's very hard to push something fast and put out milestones and say, well, in 18 months, we're going to accomplish this. It's going to be huge. I think that doesn't work. It has to find its kind of organic move, find people that talk about it, use it, spread the word to other people. And I think that really takes time. And you can see it as well in, look at some of the media brands, if we call it that people use today. They've been around for a long time. They found their audience, and it's hard to create something new. It takes time, takes resources, patience. And so when we started Star Wine List, I told people involved, etc., this is going to take a lot of time to build, maybe 10 years to build something useful. And we're just going to, keep doing it in a very organic way, and try not to burn millions along the way, and create something useful. And I think so. 7 years in, I think, hopefully it's starting to become useful to people, and we'll keep working on it.
Yeah, and probably a better question than I asked before, really. But I mean, again, I've it's just again one man's opinion, but I've always sort of appreciated and kind of tapped into a lot of the calmness in Sweden and kind of in Scandinavia. And I know you've just said there were maybe previous examples where you weren't so calm and where you were sort of pushing it. But do you think that does tap into something of the sort of Scandinavian approach as well, where there will be sort of balance and just sort of taking things step by step rather than maybe being so aggressive, let's say, with growth?
That's a good question. I think also when you're in the culture, it's kind of hard to really see it as it's viewed from the outside. Maybe you have your own cultural glasses, so to speak. You see the world, and I think there are plenty of examples in kind of the current tech waves we've seen with Spotify and others coming out of this region that have been growing very fast and been quite focused and aggressive around it. Not in Spotify's case. I think it's been demand has driven it. But I think there's one term that's people throw around. It's like to be long-term patient and short-term impatient. You want to get things done, but you remember that what decisions, if we promise something today, we're going to have to live by it, later on, because we want to be working with people and collaborating in 10 years as well. So you don't want to burn bridges along the way, right? And think about it that way.
Yeah. And again, I think naturally, as we sort of segue off the script a little bit here, I think that you've brought up a really interesting kind of nuance, really, I'd say, in terms of your approach to star wine lists, and the example you've just given there with Spotify, because you said, okay, with media, don't push so much, but then with a massive company like Spotify, and you've said, okay, you've got to kind of meet the demand. So I'm just curious again, kind of over time, are there kind of maybe different metrics, or have there been metrics or kind of tests, I guess you kind of, or just conversations and models that you've kind of thought about that have said, okay, are we pushing, are we kind of pushing star wine list, are we maybe expanding too fast, or it's just too much, or are we meeting demand? Where does that sweet spot kind of sit, or where has it kind of sat for you over time?
Yeah, I think that's a great question and something you need to think about quite often. And I mean, when you're building something and you have a lot of people involved, and then you get like the stage we've arrived at with Star Wine now, a lot of people come to us with ideas and, it'd be cool to do this or build this, and can we collaborate on this? And then you need to think, you kind of want to say yes to everybody and everything, right? It's nice. People want to do something with you. And if you're in the team and people have ideas, and you want to say yes to everything as well, because that's amazing. People want to do things. But the truth is that, resources and everything is quite limited, and you need to be able to think, okay, we've actually spread a bit too thin. We're trying to do too much. And maybe if we're, trying to do 4 things, one of them is not getting super well done, executed well. So every now and then you have to kind of refocus and think, okay, well, remember what's really the focus here? What do we need to do first, and do that well? And we've seen I think we're seeing in the media world now a few inflection points. One is over the past year, you've seen the trend of video usage in different forms, audio as well, but it's really become visible how people, let's call it younger generation now, are consuming much more video than text, not using Google, instead using TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, whatever, to get information and stuff that, let's call it, older generations are using Google all the time and then reading whatever information on text. That is actually going away if you're under 25. So that also forces you to think, okay, what are we doing and for whom, and how do we serve this better in terms as a media platform? Should we do more video? Should we move into audio? And so there's a lot of thoughts and discussions around that, and where to meet people, really.
Yeah. No, good. I think good framing of it, really. Because as you say, it's like, okay, we can sit here and talk about Star Wine List, but then there's of course there's all of the other all the other influences that are happening in people's lives, and again, as you say, culturally and business wise, that's your day to day. That is kind of your world. But then for people outside, it may be 5 minutes of their time every couple of weeks. So it's like, okay, we've got to think about what they're doing in the kind of all the rest of their time, and where Star Wine List can kind of add value there. And again, it will be quite meta, and I think it's something we had as a slight aside in our pre-talk. But what are your thoughts around things like podcasts and things like audio? Because I believe at the moment you don't have like your own podcast, for example.
Yeah, we don't have it, but we are actually discussing it a lot and have ideas to probably test it out in the next year, in the coming year, to see where we could create something useful. And I think it's a huge trend, and we've seen that it's become part of people's lives in many ways. So you spend time listening to people, and sometimes maybe it's a topic you're not that interested in an episode, but you're just comfortable listening to the people involved.
Yeah,
and becomes like a keeping company to you. And it's fascinating, and that you can spend a lot of time in it. Whereas I think someone said that if you produce video content, you need to kind of actively become much more engaging and loud and fast, because otherwise it seems a bit sedated. Whereas the audio is kind of the opposite. You can really spend time and be thoughtful and engaging in that way. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I've got a big smile on my face because it's something that it happened to me last night. I started watching a 7-minute YouTube video, and I thought, I like the channel. The videos are usually quite good, and it was just like, okay, a bit of light watching before bed. And around 2 minutes in, I was just like, this is not speaking to me. I was like off sort of thing. But I tend to agree. I find as though, for whatever reason, I'm sure it's been studied, but when I click play on an audio, I don't know, I'll either give it more chance to get good, I'll give people more leeway. Maybe because I can just sort of, if the sound's not doing it for me, I can just look at something visually, or I can think about something else and kind of come back to it. And it's almost as though the pressure to press stop isn't so high with audio. It's just, as long as the audio is good quality, the voices are pleasing. I think exactly as you were sort of saying there, it can kind of in itself just become something like a soothing noise and soothing sort of conversation in the background, which is for me is it's good to have that distinction kind of brought up again and have it reminded to me.
Yeah, I was thinking about what we talked about before as well about culture in Scandinavia and Sweden, and I think some things that Star Wine is probably carries from that is when, for instance, when we do events and things like that, it is usually very casual. We like to do things professional, but casual is kind of how we want to frame it. There's no black tie, formal dress or anything. Come as you are and get people together. And I think maybe that's a culture thing that we're not. It's a bit laid back in that way. Another aspect, I think, is that we want to be, let's call it egalitarian in the way that, when we do juries, they tend to be, include probably at least 50% women in a lot of cases, sometimes it's been 100%. And, that kind of feels normal to keep track of that and make sure it's fairly balanced. Not something we talk about and say, brag about, well, we do this, but something that we'd like to do just as part of the everyday working. So maybe that's a bit of culture part of it.
Yeah. And again, I sort of thinking back to things that I've sort of read and kind of heard over the year, but I believe it's something that's, well, certainly I believe in Iceland and potentially in other countries of Scandinavia where, it does tend to be that there's more female representation in politics and in kind of more senior roles. So I guess it follows therefore that you're going to just this can be naturally something that you'll kind of have as a balance when you step back and analyze all the data.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's certainly not perfect in the politics or especially in the corporate worlds. I think in the Nordics, it's huge male dominance in boards and CEOs of listed companies for sure. But at least I think we're thinking about it even subconsciously.
Yeah. Amazing. And let's move into a little bit what I call the area of expertise. Which it really is all around looking at how you've developed that niche. As you said, you've had the time, and I think you have already demonstrated really kind of the proof that you've got a niche. That you're relevant. Let's say, and I would actually like to ask this in a slightly different way, because again, you as an entrepreneur, as somebody, building a successful platform. I'd actually like to talk a bit about income and, the way that you've structured Star Wine List in terms of its own income, which again, I believe are three kind of main areas. So yeah, please, take us into that. Give us that kind of part of the story.
Yeah, and I think it's part of the media world today that if you're a media company, you need a few legs to stand on. Usually, in the old days, let's say with newspapers, it was one part subscription and one part the ads. And now in modern media, you have different models in different ways. So for Star Wine List, we have one part which is kind of advertising based, but we call it partner content. We don't have any pure banners. But instead it's stories we create with partners, and they are tagged just like, in the Financial Times or whatever as partner content. The second part is sponsors for our events, the Wine List Awards. So the best sparkling wine list can be presented by Night Timber, for instance, who's a global partner of ours we worked with for a long time. And the third part is that we create what we call analytics from the wine lists in the restaurants and wine bars that we cover. So we've got about 4,000 recommendations overall on Star Wine List now, and about 3,000 of those we have the wine lists that restaurants have shared. And then you can either search those wine lists, for your favorite wines or your own wines or competitors' wines. We can also create kind of insights on, restaurants in the UK that carry wines from California. That can be interesting for the trade, or also benchmarking that if you're a producer from Spain, for instance, to show, well, you're in X percent of the Star Wines universe, and your competitors are at these numbers, and do a quarterly report, and you set targets and follow up and see how you're doing. So it becomes a bit of a trade tool. I know the sommeliers use it a lot. A lot of somms use it a lot. And we share the logins for the restaurants and wine bars that are listed by Star Wines. You actually have a login and can search the wine list yourself. So I know a lot of somms, for instance, in Copenhagen or London, use it to see, okay, if they're thinking about listing a new wine, they'll go on Star Wine List and say, okay, who else in the city's working with this wine, benchmark their offering and pricing and get ideas, etc. So that's part of it. And if you're the trade, you can sign up and contact us and do the same for a fee. So that's part of the business.
Yeah, and again, I think it's really a long-term approach. And how do you again go about, we spoke about assessing in terms of, I guess, ideas, and we spoke a bit more about the media and adding kind of bells and whistles to the website itself. But how do you kind of go around assessing potential income opportunities? Again, it feels as though by following the niche, by scratching your own itch, you've established that place, and presumably it must open up internally ideas, but then also you must get people approaching you with, oh, why don't we collaborate on this? We could do that. Just curious about your thought process around those ideas, and potentially giving a little bit of an insight into what might be some of the future ideas.
Yeah, I think so. There are ideas coming, and I think as a media company, throughout all ages, you kind of have to balance the editorial part with the business part, and where it makes sense. So, for instance, the partner stories, because we don't rate wines, we don't have ratings. This is a 99-point wine. I feel that our partner stories, telling a story about, a wine producer, is not at all problematic for us because we don't rate their wines, so we can tell the stories. At the same time, we don't. Restaurants don't pay to be listed by Star Wines and don't pay to enter the Wine List Awards. And sometimes we get questions, hey, can we promote in any way, buy a feature or whatever? And we're trying to stay, I'd rather not have any fees from restaurants because since we are a guide to restaurants and wine bars, I prefer that we are completely independent there and don't charge them anything. Mm-hmm. So I think you need to find your own way there to be relevant and see the opportunities, but also for your core and profile and and your own truth, see where this we shouldn't do this and we can do that.
Yeah, it feels a bit of as though the answer is sort of it depends. will you do X, Y, Z? I guess it depends, and it sounds as though that kind of the North Star is there, around being having a unique point of view and being able to kind of freely share based on the expertise of the ambassadors and the integrity of the platform.
Yeah, I think also be transparent in what you do, and this is how we do it. This is how we work, and then it's up to other people to judge what you do. For instance, we have the sponsors for the Wine List Awards and different categories, and sometimes people imagine that sponsors have influence or whatever. It's like for us, that's obviously not the case. Our judging panels are some of the top sommeliers in the world, and mm-hmm. they're not going to be influenced by who's on the list or not. And the partners learn about the winners the same moment and day as everybody else, right? So they have zero influence or insights into the process. And maybe there's been like once or twice potential sponsor marketing person who feels that, oh yeah, okay, we can join this and sponsor this, but then of course it has to be our wines on the lists that win or finalists. I was like, yeah, I'm sorry, that's not how it works, right? This is media. It's not, part of your marketing department. So you need to educate a few there, maybe.
Yeah, and that we might be getting into slightly controversial waters here. But is that kind of indicative of the how awards can be perceived out there? Because again, it depends, isn't it? It's like, okay, there are awards where, as you say, everything is sort of totally. It's immediate. It's not something that can be bought, or it's not something that is for sale. It's like we've got that legitimacy there, and how do you kind of reinforce that? I guess, or is it important to reinforce that?
Yeah, well, I think we have to explain it a number of times, and I think maybe that's me coming from a journalistic background and media background, maybe culture, in the Scandinavian, the Nordics, that you just. That's not how it works, It'll be so. I think sometimes we just have to explain how we do it and what we do, and it would be quite silly to throw away your entire integrity, independence for a couple of euros in a sponsorship somewhere.
Yeah, and it also just reminds me, the people that need to know, the kind of the winners. They'll know, I think that there's always an element of that, where it's like, okay, there's maybe, there's hundreds of awards and, we're sort of segueing a little bit here, but, when we think about, again, things like points and ratings and things like that, I think as well, maybe, there's people kind of, let's say they know, or at least they talk about and they suspect, the points that are maybe overly generous or have had influence there, and the ones that they kind of respect, even though that might not be completely evident and transparent upfront. People in the trade, they talk, don't they? And they'll kind of figure it out. Yeah,
I think sometimes people think there's more to it than there really is. Sometimes it's just a rating, sometimes it's just a review. There's, usually nothing going on behind the scenes, I think.
Mm-hmm. And again, in terms of as we kind of transition into challenge, really, I think that again, what I liked about our pre-talk is that I think you saw there were, let's say, opportunities really for wine to be sort of to be growing and as well as challenges which maybe have hindered us in the past, and there were two really conflicting examples that you gave, Krister, when we were talking. So one was, I think, the example you gave, you speaking with an older couple and their experience of essentially being advised to buy wine en primeur, on one end of the spectrum, and then there was the other end of the spectrum where you're talking about really the natural wine movement and that being maybe somewhere kind of where people could kind of find their own way, they can kind of find their own path. And I just wonder if you wouldn't mind almost retelling those two stories and kind of conflicting them, which I think was a really interesting kind of dichotomy.
Yeah, thank you. The first one was actually a wine dinner I joined recently. I chatted with two older couples, and as you mentioned, they'd been buying en primeur Bordeaux top wines this year's campaign, and advised by someone. And I asked, okay, so you must really love those wines. And it turned out they had never tried them. So, and it's like, why, first of all, why buy en primeur in that case if you haven't tried it, if you don't love the wine, and to see that sometime in the future that, God knows when, because you can buy these wines on the open market and back vintages and enjoy them now if you like, if you want to. And I think sometimes that part of the wine trade, the futures, the speculation, the pricing, and it becomes a race with prestige and everything. And I think that takes wine away from sharing and enjoying and bringing people together. And, it has more in common with buying Bitcoin than enjoying something over dinner, right? And I think I think that's sad. If you are, a bit younger and you want to invest in en primeur and think it's going to go up, why not? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But I think that whole trend that's, kind of a commodity, buying gold bars or Bitcoin or a wine case, that takes away from the joy and core of it, really. And the second part, natural wine movements, I think that sometimes also, perhaps a bit more before, but, my generation and others who come from a classical background think, well, natural wine's nothing, it's, I had a bad natural wine and it's crap. Mm-hmm. And I think that takes away of all the joy that's come with it, younger people and exploring and finding the fun in going to a wine bar and sharing something that's unusual you've never had before, and bringing in new people, new generation, and having fun around wine. So I think that's been great. And I think over the last couple of years, we've seen that this maybe spread between the classical worlds and the natural wine worlds have really shrunk. And if, let's say in Stockholm now, if you're a Michelin star restaurant and you don't have a few references of, let's call it the natural wine movement, you're seen as a bit out of touch. You need to be contemporary and find the things. Maybe not the most funky stuff going into a Michelin star restaurant, but I think it's come together in a good way. I think it's spread a lot, and I think that part is really cool to see. And it'll be fun to see where it goes from here as well.
The natural wine movement and
the movement and the trends and what comes next, and maybe the other trends that come in, and remind people that it's fun to enjoy and drink wine, even if you're going no alcohol, low alcohol, and other trends coming. That of course is can be a threat to the wine world as a whole, but I think there'll be hopefully a lot of good wine still being drunk.
Yeah. This is it. I mean, and again, it is something that I've mentioned before, really around language. It does always surprise me how, natural wine is still in some quarters. It's just, you can just see people's faces sort of, screwing up as soon as they hear it. But then you see them at a tasting and I see them. They're basically, drinking and then writing about natural wines, and it may just be that the code word or the safe word now is low intervention, and it's just like, oh, we love low intervention wines, but we don't drink natural wines, or natural wines are faulty. And it's like, actually, guys, language is something that's always evolving. Niches within any product, including wine, they're always evolving, and tastes and preferences are always evolving as well. So to sort of blanket things with a natural wine term, I don't think it's necessarily useful anymore, if it ever was.
Yeah, no, it's true. But I think also that maybe parts of the natural wine will have changed a bit too. For instance, I think it's Frank Cornelis in Sicily, right? That adds a bit of sulfur now to stabilize them a bit, and he thinks it makes them better. Whereas if you're, very anti-sulfur, you think that's a crime. But I think maybe the dogmas have softened a bit for the pleasure of the wine and the people.
Yeah. This is a probably a 3-hour conversation. we'll maybe save that. We'll save that conversation. But
then we need a few bottles of wine to get that conversation.
Yeah. No. Exactly. We'll need to do a on location special over in Sweden. We'll go and get some somms together, and we'll do a deep dive in a more fun and practical way.
Yeah.
So listen, I absolutely I've loved speaking with you today, Krister. Really, as we look towards closing, I'd like to really encourage you to think and sort of project off, I guess, long term, and bring in really elements like what I would say the kind of the purpose, the things that still gets you jumping out of bed in the morning, and things that give you the energy to share and to bring in this virtual team, and to bring on new ambassadors, and to open new cities. This is all energy, and it's all kind of goodwill. If you kind of again project off and look off into the future, what are those sort of changes that you still have to make that still keep you motivated?
Yeah, I think, I mentioned balance, right? We want to grow to cover basically the world, of course. And there are so many places we'd love to cover more, much more in South America, Africa, parts of the other continents as well. But I have to do it step by step and not overstretch both team and resources and everything. So finding the balance. And sometimes I get the question, okay, how do you decide where to go next, start a new guide somewhere? I think I used to say that it's like half strategy and half opportunity. One half is strategy because, okay, we want to have Barcelona, we want to have the big cities of the world. But then you get to contact someone from, the left side saying, hey, I love Star Wine List. I'd love to bring it to Kazakhstan, for instance, that we launched last year. I didn't think Kazakhstan was really on the map that soon. But then, great ambassador. So we now have recommendations in several parts of Central Asia, even before some of the big wine cities in the world. I think that's fun to see, it gets spread in a bit unusual ways. I think it'll keep going. I definitely want us to be much better at, South America, Africa, and parts of Asia in the next couple of years. It'll take some time. And I've said to the team as well that, my idea of long-term destination here would be that the team runs everything, and I'm the one traveling around southern half of Africa, checking out the cool places in Zambia, Botswana, and Namibia. That's what I'll focus on.
I love it. Yeah, you mentioned Namibia in our pre-call, but it's now Botswana has sort of joined the party as well. So. I love it. So I'm of course, curious about how my listeners can kind of help or can kind of get involved. So, please maybe, as we sit here at the 2025 on the horizon, are there any sort of, interesting, meaningful dates that are, coming up, let's say? And what might be some of the channels and ways that the people who are listening can get involved?
Yeah, thanks. So Star Wine, it's both an app and a website. So feel free to go to starwines.com or on the app stores and download the apps. Sign up to the newsletters and everything to keep track of what's happening. There's a lot of launches and updates going on, and Wine List Awards. So I think those are the best ways. And social media, Instagram, TikTok, wherever is your preference. I'm sure you can track us there.
A huge thanks to today's guest, Krister Bengtsson, Star Wine List founder. Visit starwinelist.com, the link is below, to both access the platform and find their main social media handles. And why not reach out to Krister to let him know what you thought of the episode and ask any questions that it might have raised. I've also included the link below to the full list of 2025 UK award winners, and a massive congratulations to all the winners and shortlisted restaurants and bars. Next time on the Mosaic of Wine Series 2 in episode 579, I'll be speaking with Dercio Viana Jr., Master of Wine. Subscribe to be alerted when the episode goes live. And if you're not already, then why not follow Interpreting Wine, where I'm at Interpreting Wine on Instagram and Facebook, at Wine Podcast on Twitter, or email hello@interpretingwine.com. See you soon.